Hey folks, this is Maria, and I'm here with the creator of Ashes, Zoë Flowers. This is part one of our efforts to have some conversation about Cenizas as we are here on our GoFundMe campaign. So we're so blessed to have Zoë here. And Zoe, if you can open up and first share a little bit about yourself, give a little bit of a bio, who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Zoë Flowers, and I am a longtime domestic violence advocate, also an artist, and friend of Maria, sister of Maria, and been doing domestic violence work for almost 20 years now, and decided a few years ago to get into to really nurture my artistic self, which I had kind of put on the back burner for a long time. And yeah, so that's who I am in a nutshell. Human, spiritual person. Does healing work every now and then. So I do a couple different things.
Yes, yes. And I hope folks will be able to connect more in with your beautiful spirit through this conversation.
Sure.
So, Zoe and I met, what, maybe 6 years ago. We were both working on a project together and we're facilitating some healing workshops. And now here we are. We actually, Zoe planted the seed for this adaptation years ago.
And then forgot.
And then forgot. And then I remembered.
As I want to do. And with our matching unplanned hairstyles that we have today. Hope y'all our side swoop, honey. We did it for you unintentionally.
We did it for Cenizas.
Yes.
So we're here now. Fast forward. So grateful. And Zoe, can you talk a little bit about Ashes? How it was born? Where did it come from?
Yeah.
Get back to the roots of it all.
Yeah, sure. So Ashes came out of a book that I wrote, which at the time it was called Dirty Laundry. Now it's called From Ashes to Angels Dust, A Journey Through Womanhood. And it came about because I was a survivor of dating violence. And because of that dating violence, I had to leave the state that I was in, because at that time, the police officers weren't taking stalking seriously. They definitely weren't taking domestic violence seriously. They definitely weren't taking women of color who were in dating relationships seriously. And so even though the relationship was over, my partner at the time had started stalking me about a year, I guess, about a year or so after the relationship ended, and broke into my apartment while I was, away. And the police basically told me, there's nothing you can do. We can't do anything for you. That was kind of in the days where they said, unless they're using violence against you, there's nothing that we can do. So it just so happened at that same time, I was doing a hair show in it. I was going to do a hair show in Atlanta, went to Atlanta, fell in love with Atlanta, and decided, you know what, I'm going to move to Atlanta. And the police officer said, true, it was a Black woman, and she said, truly, that is the best thing you can do, because we cannot protect you. There's nothing we can do for you. So I moved to Atlanta 4 months after just like a huge stalking incident, which is in the book, actually, and moved to Atlanta. Did not know anybody, just then when I moved there, I didn't know anyone, and just was starting my life over. And just started to, I had already been writing poetry here and there and playing with writing articles and things like that. But I really was just kind of a person that I just had a day job. I didn't really consider myself to be a writer or anything like that. But I journaled a lot. I did a lot of poetry sort of on my own. But when I moved to Atlanta, because I did not have anyone, and then I found out that, I have a cousin who lives there. So then I had like a couple people there, but really I had nobody that I grew up with. I didn't even know what the post office was. I didn't know anything. And so I really turned to writing as a way of healing, and found an artistic community. And then I got an idea for a book because nobody knew about the relationship that I was in except for my god sister. So, and even she didn't know the extent of the relationship. And so once I started talking to friends about why it was that I left, because nobody knew, like, as far as they knew, I just picked up and left. So once I started telling people why I left, my friends started sharing their experiences with violence. And it was like every person I knew had an experience with violence in one way or another. And by that time, I was on the poetry circuit, so to speak, in Atlanta. This was like, I don't know, a couple of years before the whole Love Jones came along and kind of killed the poetry scene. But anyway, killed the real poetry scene, but that's another story. So I had friends sort of from my poetry crew as well. And even they were in abusive relationships, all Black women. And I was like, wait a minute, what? Like, and we never had talked about it. But when I brought it up, it was like, oh yeah, I grew up in this. And oh yeah, this happened to me. And oh yeah, I was molested. It was just crazy. And so I was like, I think I want to write a book about this. And so I started to write actually a book of fiction about it. And then through a series of events, I decided to actually write a book of nonfiction. And I decided to start interviewing not just my friends, but then I just found a local shelter and I started interviewing women from the shelter and just kind of then just started interviewing, would go into coffee shops and put I came up with like this questionnaire, and I can't believe how much energy I used to have, but I came up with a questionnaire and I would just put it in coffee shops all along Atlanta, and people called me that way. And then people I knew who lived in California would send me their stories in the mail, because that was when people still mailed things. And then I started sort of investigating like this whole world, and it was like, oh, there's a name for this, and there's like dynamics, and there's reasons why this happens. And so so the book came about. And even as I was putting the book together, I had some kind of forethought. Like, I knew I wanted to do like a documentary. I didn't want it to just be a book. I knew I wanted to do a documentary or a play or something on top of the book. But I didn't. I just kind of wrote a skeleton of Ashes and put it in the drawer, because by then I had a job, and so I was working and all this stuff, and in the domestic violence movement. And then after I left that job, I took the book out. I took the book out, and I was like, oh, well, I'm no longer working in this domestic violence organization. Maybe now I should write this book that's been sitting for like 3 years. So I self-published the first iteration of the book, sold about 200 copies, got very discouraged, because at that time people still weren't really talking about, Black people anyway, weren't really talking about domestic violence. And so
what year was this?
It was when people weren't talking about domestic violence. So we ain't finna age in this interview. People can count backwards to, yeah. So we ain't gonna age people. So it was a time when people didn't feel as comfortable as now talking about domestic violence. So so just like I said, did a short run, 200 copies. That was it for me. And then I just started building my career in the domestic violence movement. And then in 2010, I reconnected with my friend Sherry Pullum, because I found this sort of skeleton of what would become Ashes in my computer. And I was like, oh my gosh, like there's something here. And reconnected with my friend Sherry, and she was like, oh my God, I want to be heavily involved. I want to dramaturg this piece. And what a dramaturg does is they help to build structure around a play. And then the more we talked, we were like, well, maybe we should really work on this more together. And so we started developing the vignettes. And so Sherry and I have developed a lot of the vignettes together. And then the poetry, because it's very different writing a book than writing a play. And so some of the stories that were in the book, I turned into poetry. Some were poetry that I had already written that fit perfectly within the context of the story. And then, you know, in thinking about how do you contextualize a play, because you couldn't just, I mean, I guess you could just tell the stories and let that be a play, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to create a historical context because of my domestic violence background and because I'm a history sociology nerd. And so I was like, okay, let's look at the let's look at the transatlantic slave trade. Because for me, that's always been like a huge example of domestic violence, because you have the physical, you have the emotional, you have the spiritual, certainly had the economic. And so really to set the sort of scene for what women of color experience now, started it on the slave ship. And the reason why we felt it could be a universal story is because, as we know, colonialism went everywhere. So that's why I feel like it's going to be for you to do this Latinx adaptation, even though it was written at first with sort of Black women in mind. Colonialism, obviously, we know is worldwide. So hence, so that's how Ashes was born. Long story long.
Thank you for taking us through that journey.
Sure.
I love that you also illustrated the pauses and just sort of I saw this wave of the process of Ashes, and also so much props for honoring that creativity inside of you as you were, you know, moving through life and working your day job and also stepping into this world of advocacy that can sometimes not leave much space for anything else.
That's right.
So for you to continue to go back to it and then to finally complete it, and be at this space that you are now, could you talk a little bit about where are you with Ashes? What's going on with it?
Sure. So Ashes is in a really great place, and actually so is the book. So Sherry and I began really digging into Ashes in 2010, and we had in August of 2010 really, and then in February of 2011 we sort of had our first reading, and we had a series of readings and things like that for many years. And then we started getting invitations to, we did the NCADV conference, gosh, it's 2018. So 2 years ago now, we did the NCADV conference. We've done Ashes at the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence, their formerly battered women's caucus. We were invited to the United States of Women, the White House event in 2016 to perform excerpts there, performed at Yale, performed at Smith, did excerpts at both of those places, did excerpts at Springfield College, at Ramapo College. So we've done different excerpts. Since 2011, we've been in a couple of festivals. So we've been like to lots of different places across the country. And then last year, we embarked on this journey with Brown University under their research method, where the Rights and Reasons Theater, which is a part of the Department of Africana Studies, they have this research method, this research to performance method, where they help artists take a work that they find is valuable, but that they know it can be even better. And they help you to improve upon the piece. And so we started working with them last year, and we went through a focus group, and then they wanted us to really tailor this particular iteration of Ashes to Rhode Island. And so we interviewed Rhode Island survivors, and then turned their stories into vignettes, and this time it was more audio visual, which was really cool because we had some of the actors actually record parts of the interview and play it throughout the piece, which I was like super excited about. And then we had some of the words that they were saying up on the screen. Well, really wasn't a screen, but we made a screen. The set design person created a beautiful set. And so you would see the words up against the backdrop that he created. While the actors were doing their business on the stage. So that was super exciting. So we had 2 sold out shows 2 weekends ago. or weekend before last, I guess. 2 sold out shows, and it was amazing. We're still getting great reviews from people that were there, and also just wonderful reviews from the survivors who we interviewed who were also there. So that was really amazing.
Okay. So you took us back to the foundation. We just talked a little bit about where it is now, has moved through these great, very powerful and influential spaces. And now, where do you see it going? If you can talk about your vision for the future and this first, hopefully, of many adaptations.
Yeah, so right from the beginning, Sherry and I definitely saw the global aspect of the piece because obviously domestic and sexual violence affects every population on the planet. And so we knew we wanted it to be global. And as a matter of fact, there was a theater called Different Strokes Theater in Asheville, North Carolina, that licensed the show in 2015. And they had, oh my gosh, I think they had about 12, oh my knee. Sorry. They had about 12 actors performing, and they had a multi-racial, multi-ethnic cast. And that was the first time we had seen that. And so that even more made us be like, this can definitely be adapted. So love that you are adapting the piece. And so we want to see more of that. I mean, what would it look like to have like an all Asian version of Ashes or South Asian version? I mean, who knows? I would love that. Of course, we want to go on tour. Um, I have a dream sort of, I would love like a Rosie Perez, directed version in Atlanta. That's like my dream. I have like my dream. Well, I already have a dream cast, but I have like a dream director that I would just love to direct the cast in Atlanta. Like that's really what I would be over the moon. I mean, it's so great that we're coming to LA. Not with my cast though. So I would love for my cast to like do a nice long run in Atlanta. Although I will take even a weekend. I will take one night in Atlanta because I just feel like we would get so much love there. So I would love that. And then I would love more colleges and universities. Like again, back to Atlanta, I'd love to be at Spelman. I'd love to, I went to Georgia State, so I'd love to see an iteration at Georgia State. Would love a tour. And then would love a documentary of the actors so they could talk about the experience of being in the show, because we now have sort of a group of women who can talk about how the rituals in the show have changed them. So after this show at Brown, one of the actors came to me and she was like, I'm now studying the Yarisha. And I was like, gotcha. Gotcha. And they're like into Florida water and they're investigating crystals. And so in Asheville, Carolina, I mean, there were women like in their mid 40s that were in the show that this was their first performance, and now they're like acting. So I would love to do a documentary on sort of the making of Ashes.
It's so expansive in terms of the spaces and just sort of themes that it touches on and how it ignites this movement inside of a person who, whether they're a storyteller in it, whether they are in the audience, whether they portrayed one of the individuals from the story, to see the transformation. That's powerful. And just earlier we were talking about how is this piece, how is this process an intervention and supportive of survivors and all those who come in contact with it. And I'm very curious too in terms of the audience because of the awareness that this creates. how, because of its different layers and because of the ritual piece, how that might touch someone who maybe isn't as involved with the work or in the movement on a different level. And in terms of just really working towards ending violence against women, gender-based violence. I'm really curious about that piece.
Yeah. So the thing about the show is, of course, after we interviewed the Rhode Island survivors, we had more instances of domestic and sexual violence that we added. But really the show is about healing. And how do you heal yourself within the context of domestic sexual violence, but also gossip, also body image, also gender nonconformity, you know, in a society that says you should be this way, especially with the current administration. So it's really about healing, and it's really about how do I love myself. And so what we have found, and even at this Brown performance, and even, you know, when we did the show in New York, folks, older white men, 30-year-old white men coming up to us saying, you know, they loved it. They were like, certainly they can't relate to certain parts of it, but there were certain parts that they could. Older Black men who in the debrief, because we always do a debrief after every performance, older Black men talking about how they were molested by babysitters and aunties and all that, and they had never told anybody, but that they felt the truth of the piece, and they felt that the room was a safe space. And even more now, it's like a ritual space because of, you know, how we chose to begin this particular show was like so different. We really started the show in ritual, showing video from our soul shifting retreats, sort of documentary done by the phenomenal Jerry Hilt. So as people were walking into the space, they saw fire ritual, they saw water ritual, they saw G and I on hammocks and just being like at the water and just being good, you know, sister friends and just, you know, doing ritual. And so we really created a ritual space, and people, even the moderator was so funny at the debrief. She could not even really speak at first. Like the moderator needed a minute because she said she was vibrating so much from the show. And because she said, wow, she really felt like she was in a sacred space because we have the Florida water in the space. We had an altar in the space. On top of that, the actors had their own altar that they had created in the back of the stage. And so people really, you know, and as information, the one of the reviews that I shared with you, you know, the woman said she came into the space one way and she left another way. She felt cleansed. That's the point, you know, is for people to come in one way and leave another way. And people have seemed to have been very receptive.
And shout out to Soul Shifting Retreats, Dr. Joe Robinson. Check out the work. That's another space that Zoe and I have been a part of as co-creators. So lots of love to that community.
I'm looking at my cat because his foot is now completely on my keyboard.
Hey, Prince.
He just almost fell too. That's what you get for trying to be in the interview. Go ahead.
So Prince got me a little deviated me off the track. What was I going to ask you? So I was going to ask you, can you speak to why is it important for this phase one of Cenizas that we're going to be hosting these workshops, that we're going to be together over the course of 2 days? Why should people donate to this first phase? Why is it important?
That's such a great question. Well, I think for all the reasons that we just talked about, number one, it's an important piece. Healing is for everyone. Decolonizing, healing spaces is for everyone. A lot of times when people of color look to healing spaces, they don't always see themselves. And so they don't realize that healing is not only possible, but healing is for them. And so it's so important that here you are creating this beautiful environment where people will be seen, heard, and felt. And those things have to be funded. The practitioners have to be paid. They're giving their time. And we want to value people's time, people's energy, people's participation. And this work is changing the world. Mm. You think about the work that, you work with a survivor, you have the potential to change a whole generation. Mm-hmm. You heal a mother, you heal a father who have children, you heal a gender non-conforming person who has a child. You have changed a generation, because that interaction that child is going to have with that parent is completely different. You're interrupting the wounding process of trauma. We are helping to, get this trauma out of our system, especially with you're going to be using dance and all the different things that you're going to be doing. So we really need people to join us on this healing journey. We can't, we're good, but we can't change the world alone. We need your help to change the world. So donate today.
And I think about what does it look like and what does it mean for us to, as women of color, set out and seek funding on our own. And so we've been chatting about this for some time. So this is a first attempt at exploring, can we set up a GoFundMe? Can we be like, community, we see this need, community, we're doing this for our future coming generations. We're doing this to disrupt the violence. We're doing this to touch the folks in the audience. We're doing this to provide an intervention for the storytellers. So that's exciting to me, just to launch that and to explore that. And we want to hear from you. Please, offer up suggestions if you're like, Maria, this is great. And we think, here's another avenue for funding that you may not have considered. And our culmination for the live production of Cenizas is October 2019, DV Awareness Month. So between the closing of this workshop in April, and then we would love to hear from community and be guided through this process. I definitely want to explore other sources, other avenues to make this happen. So much love for all of you who are following us on this journey and in this exploration of this first adaptation of Ashes. So I'm really happy. My heart continues to just overflow with gratitude for you, Zoe, for all of you that are following this project and have been so receptive and shown so much support. So just want to say thank you. And so do you have any closing words for folks who are watching?
I do. I'm thinking about all those, organizations. I mean, how many domestic violence, sexual violence organizations are around the country and in the territories? Like, donate today. Tell your friends to donate. Yeah. As a matter of fact, Maria, as we were thinking about, so we'll talk after the recording is over, because I have a couple other ideas. Yeah. But domestic violence people, organizations, national domestic violence organizations, like, fund this project, fund the healing of women of color. Why not?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, Zoe, for connecting about this piece. And this is part one of our interview series on this fundraising campaign. Next week, we'll be talking with Lisa Rocha, who is the founder and brilliant artist for the line Elements. Lisa is supporting the project by donating some jewelry pieces, and we'll be incorporating some healing stones. She's thinking about including pieces that are going to support the throat chakra for our storytellers. So even looking at what are the different ways that folks are showing up and saying, this is how I can bring my magic. This is how I can bring what I have to offer to support Cenizas. I have chills, and I'm so grateful. So thank you, everybody, and we'll
Oh,
see
I
you.
do have one more question. Sorry. So how can folks, how can they donate?
They can donate by going to gofundme.com/Cenizas Phase 1. That's Cenizas. And the information is there, the story, what your money will go towards, and what the live production will look like. There's a little bit of information about that, including we're looking for culturally specific programs in the area, in the Los Angeles area, to be beneficiaries. We're working on that. We're talking to a couple organizations now who are doing some fabulous work. So more to come on who those beneficiaries are.
Amazing. Okay, great. And thank you again. And if folks want to get in touch with me, my social media is very easy. It's I am Zoë Flowers. So you can just Google that, and that will connect you to my Instagram, my YouTube, and all of that good stuff. And my website is soulrequirements.org.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Donate.
Yes.